Hello, hello. I I don't even know what I'm doing. I just know I need to do something. And I can't stay silent anymore. Or at least I need to tell my story and the whole story. And there are going to be so many people who don't like this. My family being the number one top stock in that dislike category. So here I am telling my story, and I'm going to give a brief synopsis of everything because I'll be doing videos that will deep dive into a lot of this. And I'm going to be doing this with some of my relatives, some of my cousins who have been on this journey with me. But where to start? I guess to start at the beginning. I grew up in an abusive house with a narcissistic father who was also an alcoholic, and alcoholism ran rampant in my family. And I had a brother 5 years younger than me who unfortunately passed in 2013. So to get to that point, there was a lot of dysfunction in the family. There was divorce, which happens to a lot of families. Um, but where things go sideways is my father's narcissism. And I didn't even know what that was called. I just thought all dads were like my dad. And I tried to maneuver those waters as best I could. And my brother and I were huge supporters of each other in this. We fought like cats and dogs, but we were also fiercely protective of each other. We were the only ones who could fight with each other. Um, and things went awry when my dad moved across the country and my brother later followed him. We knew my dad was a drinker. We didn't know quite the extent of it, and I believe it got worse when he did move so far away, and thus left my, at the time, 10-year-old brother in the hands of not just a narcissist, but a drunk narcissist. And I guess the trouble really started when my brother confided in me that he was addicted to heroin. And he was 15 at the time. And, he told me some things. I knew there were some issues going on. My dad had driven drunk with my brother in the car. My uncle was trying to intervene, living on the other side of the country in the same place where my dad was. And so I was trying to maneuver this from a distance as a teenager, trying to figure out how best to help and support my brother. And so when my brother told me he was a heroin addict at the age of 15, I didn't know what to do at that point. All I could do is reach out to those I knew who could help him because they were there in the vicinity with him and be there for him. And so this turned into a long battle with drugs and alcohol for my brother. And what I realized is that that was his coping mechanism. That's how he escaped. That's how he maneuvered life. I went down a very different path. My coping mechanism was to throw myself into school, into work. I became the overachieving people pleaser. And we were coping in different ways. Neither was healthy. And it was a very complicated relationship. We tried getting my brother help. He went into rehab several times trying to get that help. He was in and out of jail and in trouble with the law. And a lot of it was drug related and just him trying to get access to drugs. And there was just a lot of dysfunction, so much dysfunction and toxicity on both sides of my family. And it wasn't until my brother's death, May 19th, 2013, when everything came crashing down around me. But it was the only way for me to see things as they were. And so that was the hardest time of my life, and yet it is the time I'm probably most grateful for, because it helped me see the truth. It helped me see things for what they were. It opened my eyes. It forced me to look inwards, and it forced me to face things that I was running away from. So my brother didn't just die. If it was a drug overdose, which is something we had prepared ourselves for, that would have been one thing. We knew that that was always a possibility. That phone call could come at any time. That an overdose would be likely given my brother's addiction. And that is not the phone call. Unfortunately, my brother chose to die. And I know there are things that we can't say on YouTube, but my brother unalived himself. And my world stopped that day. So it was a long road of healing. It was a messy, messy road. And grief is anything but linear. Society seems to think that there's a timeline, that we grieve, we face it, we deal with it, we get over it, we move on. That's not how grief works. And it is anything but linear. It is a process. Grief is a life sentence, is what I usually say, because it doesn't go away. It just morphs and changes. We become more accustomed to it. We develop a new norm, and we learn to live in that new normal. And unfortunately, we don't just lose one person in our lifetime. We have to learn to deal with loss over and over and over again. So grief is ever present, but nobody wants to talk about grief. Nobody wants to have the uncomfortable conversation. Nobody wants to talk about what it really looks like. We feel shame around it for some reason. And yet it's something we all go through at some point. We all experience it differently. We all process it differently. It looks different depending on who it is we've lost. There's so many complexities to grief, and yet we still don't talk about it, which is why I am starting this channel, which is why I feel this call, this pull to have these tough conversations and to open up and to get nitty gritty, deep down, dirty, talking about all this malarkey, these preconceived ideas of what we think grief is. And let's start being honest with ourselves. And let's start opening up the conversation and talking about it. And talking about it not like it's a disease. Grief is something that happens to us. It's an affliction. We can't avoid it. We can't dodge it. It's going to come. It's not a matter of if. The question is when. Are you prepared for it? Are you equipped with the things that you need to handle it right now in this moment? And I can tell you, I was not prepared. We don't have those conversations before because we don't want to think that that is ever a possibility. We don't want to think that we could lose somebody in that way. But again, it's not a matter if, it's when. So on May 19th, 2013, when I got the phone call that my brother had decided to unalive himself, my world never looked the same again. And for many, many years, it was quite ugly and dark and scary. And the people you think who are going to be there for you aren't always the people who are there for you. And in some cases, they're the ones who come at you the hardest. And so you lose not just that person who died, you lose other people in your life who you thought you could count on. You lose friends because they can't deal or cope with the magnitude of your loss. It's like people have this idea that grief is contagious, and if they are with you, you might rub off on them and it will happen to them. And they remove themselves from your life because they can't deal with the uncomfortableness of what your life is looking like, because they don't want that to happen to them. And the family that should be there for you in that time, who are also grieving that loss, can sometimes be the people who hurt you the most. And that, unfortunately, is my experience. And that is what they don't want me to tell you about. Although they've been screaming it from the rooftops for the past 10 years. But this is now my platform. This is now my place where I can tell that story. I can tell what happened in that time, and I can tell what they did to me, to my mom, to my niece. And the one thing that has pissed me off the most is that not one of them stopped to think about what their actions would do to my brother's daughter, who was 7 years old at the time of his death. And that angers me. And that, more than anything, is why I am here today talking about this and telling my story, because my story has impacted her reality and will impact her reality from here on in, because of choices that they made maliciously, purposefully, to set out to intentionally harm me and my mom. And the wreckage from that, the shrapnel from that, those attacks have forever impacted my niece. And hasn't she suffered enough? So this is why I'm here talking about it. This is why I want to have open conversations about grief, and not always about doom and gloom. There are aspects to grief that can be beautiful. There are aspects to grief and loss that can remind us that life is everlasting. Death is not a finality. We remain spiritually connected forever. So this isn't about doom and gloom. And when people see somebody talking about death and grief, they think, oh, God, I don't want to deal with it. It's too heavy. But that's why I called this channel Good Grief. Because grief doesn't always look bad. And I can honestly say my brother's death saved my life. That I am here today because of a choice my brother made 11 years ago. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't want him back if that were an option that was given to me. But I say, given the course of what has happened, my brother forced me to look at things very differently, to look at my life very differently, to look inward, to heal, to acknowledge, to understand, so that I could break the chains of toxicity. I could break the chains of abuse, and I could move forward and not just survive, that I could thrive. And so it is that I thank my brother for that gift. And I know he is with me, walking me through this step by step. Our relationship hasn't ended because his life in human form ended. We are still connected. So let's get talking. Let's talk about grief. Let's talk about the things that make us uncomfortable. But let's talk so that we know we're not alone. Let's talk so that you understand that your feelings are valid, that what you're going through matters, because it does. And you are not alone. You are not crazy. You are not wrong for feeling the things that you're feeling. It is valid for you to be having all the feelings, all the confusion, all the frustration, all the anger, all the feelings. And so I'm here to tell you, you're not alone. I see you. I feel you. I hear you. I understand you. And we're in this together. Stay tuned for more in-depth parts of this story. Stay tuned for guests. I'm going to have guests come on and talk about their stories, because if there's something that we learn in grief, we connect to other people who are going through a similar journey, and we learn about the strength of humankind. We learn about what's the word I'm looking for? The strength of the human condition. And so I have some amazing people who are going to be coming on and sharing their stories. And let's talk about it. And if you have questions, pop them in the chats. Let's get the conversation going. So make sure to hit subscribe, hit that bell for notifications, and stay tuned for more. I want to make you part of my Good Grief group. Be part of our Walking Angels.